There are few horror franchises that can match up to the legacy of Friday the 13th or the primary antagonist, the murderous Jason Voorhees. From the time I watched the first movie as a kid to the present day, where I look back at the movie series with nostalgia and rewatch over a couple of beers, the entertainment value has always been top-notch, even if the quality of the content faded. Now that a new prequel series called Crystal Lake has been announced by Peacock, we thought it might be a good time to revisit some of the major open-ended questions that the movies have failed to clarify. In this video, we'll explore some uncharted territory, so feel free to join the discussion in the comments down below. What is the exact nature of Jason Voorhees? Is he a human or something supernatural? This is one of the biggest questions that fans of the franchise have, even though some of the later movies have tried to clear the air around this. From the very beginning of the franchise, Jason Voorhees and his exact nature have been shrouded in mystery. It's been revealed in the first movie that he was a young boy who suffered from certain physical and mental deformities before he was bullied and tortured and thrown into the lake. He supposedly drowned in this accident, but it turned out that he was back with a vengeance. In the subsequent movies, Jason's nature bordered more on the supernatural. For instance, Friday the 13th Part 2 suggests that Jason survived the drowning and has been living secretly in a cabin in the woods. It's still unclear if he's some kind of undead creature or someone who's been reanimated, or if he is really just a human with such extreme powers and abilities. He did age through all his time in hiding, which implies a human angle, but the way he can survive some powerful blows that can kill most individuals again points to the supernatural aspect of things. There are some answers that can be found in the movie Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. He's announced dead at the beginning of this movie, but Tommy Jarvis accidentally causes his resurrection after he impales Jason's corpse with a metal pole that's struck by lightning. This Frankenstein-style resurrection is surely out of the ordinary, and at this point in the franchise, Jason is some kind of supernatural monster. What he is exactly still cannot be defined because he's not a zombie or a demon. We would say he's a mixture of everything, combined with the fact that even his psychology is so twisted that it brings him at par with the demented serial killers across history. The Jason vs. Freddy vs. Ash comic series offers some explanation in this regard. Here, Jason did drown in the lake, and Pamela resurrected him using necromancy. This brought him back as some undead entity, but since his life changed completely, Pamela still had an intense hatred for the Crystal Lake camp counselors and kids. Maybe the future of the franchise can deliver a definitive answer regarding Jason's supernatural abilities. Is there an explanation for all the dream sequences and visions? The discussion on the potentially supernatural nature of Jason can be further continued because of these strange sequences and visions you'll find in the movies. The first such dream or nightmare happens at the end of Friday the 13th, and here, Alice dreams about being attacked by Jason in the lake. She wakes up in the hospital, and it's officially confirmed that this scene is the first major nightmare, and there are many more to follow. The next such sequence can be observed in Friday the 13th Part 3, and here Chris has a similar dream where she's attacked by the hideous living corpse of Pamela Voorhees. Ginny also has a similar nightmare in Part 2, although there are some who believe this to be a real event in the movie. One plausible explanation could be that the waters of Crystal Lake have some kind of paranormal properties, and they take over the mind to induce such horrifying nightmares. The visions come later during the events of Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. Tina Shepard has a vision of Jason murdering her friends at a party. Well, one reason behind this vision could be that Tina demonstrated telekinetic abilities at a young age, but we still have some doubts regarding this particular vision. Also, Rennie has multiple visions in Friday the 13th Part 8, where Jason can be seen as a boy. These make it clear that there is something supernatural at work, and if the kind of injuries that Jason survives aren't convincing enough, the odd dream sequences hit the nail on the head. It would be great if a movie in the future timeline finally explains what the deal is with all of these visions and dreams, or if they're just coincidental, convoluted occurrences. Did Pamela really not know that Jason was alive? This is a glaring plot detail that's been avoided like the plague in the Friday the 13th movies. There's this constant insinuation that Jason's mother, Pamela Voorhees, did not know that her son was alive during the events of the first film, but the actions point in another direction. As you all know, Pamela's murderous rampage in the first Friday the 13th film is mainly motivated by her vengeful anger against the camp counselors for failing to save her son. The sequel reveals that Jason isn't really dead, but has been hiding for the last 20 years. We think Pamela actually knew that her son was alive because there are a few events in the movie that point to the same. For instance, it's been an open secret that Jason and his mother were really close. In an event where Jason survived the drowning, he would seek out his mother soon after. How else is a deranged and mentally challenged kid supposed to survive alone in the wild? Also, this doesn't ruin Pamela's motivation because even if she knew about Jason being alive, she would still be mad at those responsible for putting her son through all that. In fact, she might have been the one to find him a safe shelter to stay put where he could hide while she exacted revenge. In Friday the 13th Part 2, you see Jason getting revenge on Alice for his mother's death. How would he even know that she was killed unless he was there nearby and watched her being decapitated at the end of the first film? We can only assume that his mother had forbidden him to come out of his hiding, and he obeyed while she was alive, emerging only after her death to continue her work. Where was Jason during the events of the first film? Even though decades have passed since the first film was released, there are still those who wonder what Jason was up to during the events of the movie. He's presumed to have died, and his mother is revealed to be the killer who seeks revenge for her son's death. But the sequel establishes that Jason survived the drowning, and he's been in hiding in the woods near Crystal Lake. He lived in a shack and probably lived off the land while avoiding contact with anybody else. But the bigger question is, if he really was alive and around Crystal Lake, why did he never intervene? We don't see him revealing himself to his mother, and neither does he assist nor protest her killing spree. Moreover, he doesn't even do anything when she's killed and only gets his revenge after her death. The fans largely believe that Jason witnessed all the events, but he remained hidden, probably because he was traumatized. His past experience with human interaction had terrible consequences, and it is possible that he was wary of coming out in the open. Also, he was still not fully developed in terms of his physical strength. As we pointed out earlier, there is a chance that his mother was aware of his survival, and she might have forbidden him to emerge out of his hiding. He was simply obeying her commands by lurking in the shadows and observing everything from a distance, and he only had to step in after she died. What happened to Paul at the end of Friday the 13th, Part 2? This particular open-ended question has nothing to do with Jason as such, but it's more focused on one of the key characters in Friday the 13th Part 2. Here, Jason goes into berserker rage mode as he takes down the new counselors at Camp Crystal Lake were trained by Paul Holt. By the end of a bloody killing spree, only Paul and his assistant Ginny are the ones left alive. Ginny seemingly kills Jason, and she returns to their cabin with Paul, where they think that they're finally safe. However, Jason is shown to crash through the window, and there are many who consider this to be a nasty nightmare. Nevertheless, the scene then cuts away to Ginny waking up in a stretcher, and she's placed into an ambulance by the paramedics. But there are no signs of Paul, even as she calls out for her. There is absolutely no trace of him, and he's nowhere to be found. Even Jason is missing, and the final scene of the film just zooms into the decaying head of Pamela Voorhees. We've always wondered what really happened to Paul, and the most plausible answer is that he was killed off-screen by Jason. But if the scene of Jason breaking in through the window is really a dream, then Paul should be safe and sound somewhere, even if he fled the scene. There are some trusted sources who suggest that the original script had Paul being killed by Jason, and there was even an alternate ending that wasn't used. On the other hand, there is a news report in Friday the 13th Part 3 which talks about 8 victims, and if you match the on-screen deaths, then you'll realize that Paul is not among them. The fate of Paul was purposely kept ambiguous, and even today, it remains one of the franchise's enduring mysteries. Is Roy Burns connected to Jason in some way? We don't know about you, but this is one question that's bothered us ever since we watched Friday the 13th: A New Beginning. The timeline of this movie is set 5 years following the events of Friday the 13th, the final chapter, and Tommy Jarvis is now a teenager. He's still traumatized by his past experiences in the previous film, and he stays at a halfway house. One of the other teenagers living in the house, Joey, is killed by a fellow resident, and soon a series of violent murders takes place. These are indicated to have been the work of the resurrected Jason Voorhees. However, we consider this film to be one of the most unique movies in the franchise because of the unexpected climactic twist. It's revealed that the killer isn't Jason, but Roy Burns, the paramedic. It turns out that he was Joey's father, and all the killings were actually done as a revenge for his son's murder. But that doesn't answer a lot of the questions that you'll have. Firstly, why would someone in their right mind go on a revenge spree and kill many who weren't even involved in the incident in the first place? Many of his victims had absolutely nothing to do with Joey's death. Secondly, nothing really explains how Roy possessed Jason's super strength and his ability to feel no pain. Yes, extreme grief can do strange things and change people unexpectedly, but we still don't think that's a valid explanation for his psychological state. There is a theory that many fans believe, and according to this, Roy is possessed by Jason, and this gives him the powers of the psychotic killer. This one's actually a fun question to debate, so let us know in the comments what you think the reason is behind the incredible powers and maniacal nature of Roy Burns. How did Jason find Alice in Friday the 13th Part 2 with his limited intelligence? It doesn't take much to figure out that Jason isn't exactly the smartest cookie in the jar, and he is anything but cunning or intelligent enough to stalk and prey on his victims in a planned manner. Thus, it comes as a surprise when he appears in Alice's apartment in Friday the 13th Part 2 and kills her brutally. The logistics behind this scene aren't very clear, and we personally feel that Jason would have a very difficult time in finding out her location in an era with no internet or Google Maps. The novelization by Simon Hawke, however, has a proper explanation for this, and it makes sense to how Jason might come across Alice Hardy. Here, it's suggested that she returned to the Crystal Lake area in order to cope with her trauma. Jason, who was living nearby, spotted her by the lake and recognized her as his mother's killer. He then tracked her down to her apartment in town, and the movie should have elaborated on a similar explanation so as to make the scene more plausible. There are a few interesting fan theories on this matter. One of these indicates that Jason was supernaturally guided to Alice by his mother's spirit or other evil forces. If you put the novelization aside, this makes more sense than Jason just randomly stumbling upon her apartment. The other plausible theory is that Alice didn't stay far away from Crystal Lake, which meant that Jason had plenty of opportunities to keep an eye on her and follow her back to her place at an opportune time. What was the fate of Gordon the dog in Friday the 13th, the final chapter? It's a rather tense and comical moment at the same time when Jason attacks the Jarvis family in Friday the 13th, the final chapter. You might expect a heroic dog to jump in and try to save the others, but Gordon clearly thinks differently. This dog jumps out of a second-story window to escape from Jason, and the movie keeps the fate of this dog hanging in the balance. The escape sequence is portrayed on a lighter note, and the audience is supposed to find relief and humor in the fact that Gordon ran for his life, leaving his human companions in danger. However, there's no indication in the movie that the dog is later found and killed, and the Friday the 13th game just confirms this. The game is not strictly canon to the films, but there is an audio log from Tommy Jarvis, and this confirms that Gordon survived the escape attempt and was later found in the woods. The dog was then presumably returned to the Jarvis family. We're happy to go with this answer, but it would have been a nice touch if the movie cared to shed more light on the fate of the dog that got away. Does Jason have teleportation powers? We've already touched upon the ambiguous nature of Jason Voorhees and his powers, and this includes his much talked about teleportation powers as well. Now, before we even begin exploring this topic, we have to give you a clear disclaimer that the Friday the 13th franchise does not ever talk about Jason having teleportation powers as a canonical ability. On the contrary, his seemingly instant appearances are credited to his extraordinary speed and agility, and also the fact that he can be quite stealthy when required. This gives the illusion of teleportation, when it's basically just a mentally disturbed individual with crazy enhanced abilities. However, there are certain scenes across the franchise that don't convince us that Jason is simply appearing in front of the victims owing to his climbing or sprinting skills. In many of these instances, he doesn't even know the whereabouts of the location. The movie Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, in particular, sparks the debates on his teleportation abilities. He appears in different places, and some of these scenes are almost impossible without the supernatural touch of teleportation. Again, if you look at the gameplay of Friday the 13th, the video game, the teleportation is an actual gameplay mechanic called morph, and it allows Jason to appear anywhere on the map complete with scratchy VHS effects. This bit of game design was clearly done with his secret teleporting ability in mind. We'd love to hear your take on the famous teleporting slasher debate. Does Jason have any kind of sexual perversion? We were left with this question after watching Friday the 13th Part 3, where a character named Chris suffered at the hands of Jason. The movie shows Jason attacking Chris with a knife, but she's able to kick the knife away. He then drags her briefly before she passes out, and when she wakes up, she's unharmed in her bed. There's no explicit indication or depiction of Jason forcing himself on her, but there are many who believe that he might actually have certain sexual perversions. While this is a debatable topic, we strongly believe that Jason has no such inclinations. Let us not forget that Jason has taken down numerous female victims, and many of them were scantily clothed. Never has he been shown to have any kind of sexual interest, except for the fact that he kills the victims brutally. The earlier films portray him as a childlike, vengeful killer who has no demonstrated sexual motivations, and we believe Chris wasn't raped in the movie. It has been reported that the original script included a rape attempt by Jason, but the makers deliberately left it out to avoid alienating the audience. We believe that Jason's attempt on Chris was just an attempted murder or abduction and had nothing to do with his carnal urges. Jason might be many things, but he's not a despicable sexual predator. Marvelous verdict! Maybe the Crystal Lake series can find some of these answers. There's finally some good news for Friday the 13th fans after years of waiting. A new Friday the 13th prequel series called Crystal Lake has been announced, and the project is currently in development for Peacock with Brian Fuller as the showrunner. This show will explore the origins of the Crystal Lake camp and the Voorhees family, which means that we might have an explanation for some of these open-ended questions that we just discussed. Linda Cardellini is reportedly playing Pamela Voorhees, and we wish to find out more about the mother-son relationship as well, since this is a prequel narrative. A franchise as popular and memorable as Friday the 13th surely doesn't deserve so many unanswered questions, and the time has come to remedy this. Let us know in the comments down below what your thoughts are about these open-ended questions, and feel free to raise your own doubts regarding the franchise and similar unanswered stuff. Also, let us know if you're interested to see how the upcoming Crystal Lake TV series from Peacock turns out. We hope to cover it extensively on this channel.